Good evening, everybody. We're starting our Facebook Live Bible study. Tonight it's just about a minute until 8, so I hope we have some folks joining us very, very soon. I see Nancy Hart's already joined us tonight. Good to see you, Nancy. Carol Miller just joined us, looks like. It's kind of funny on my screen whenever people join, the name slides up and it's a little bit gray, and then at the bottom it says bring them, hi Eddie, it says bring them on screen. You're probably not expecting me to punch a button here and put you on the camera, are you? I don't know what would happen if I did that. Maybe I'll have to experiment with Becky one of these nights and see what happens. But technology is great, that we can be able to do our studies like this. When we get a few more people on tonight, I'll start with just a few words of news or announcements, and then we'll get right into our study for tonight. I've got Becky with me. She's going to be reading scripture again. I see Nathan Malone is on. Good to have you, Nathan. What time is it, Becky?
7 o'clock.
Okay, Becky says it's 7, so let's get into first just some sort of news or announcements. School is starting next week in Hamilton County, and it's going to be starting in a lot of different ways. Some in person, some electronic, online, some hybrid. Some parents are doing their more homeschooling type schooling this year. But it brings up something that's a tremendous prayer need. A lot of hard work has gone into making decisions and putting together plans. And so this week we're going to have a special prayer emphasis at Christ Church on students and school starting. You'll hear an announcement about this Sunday morning, but I'll give you a jump on it. 8 o'clock every morning, you're going to see on Facebook and on Instagram, you'll see a video. It'll be really short, 2 minutes, and it'll be Mary Beth, it'll be Jacob, it'll be different people who will be leading you in a prayer, and on Monday it'll be for kindergarten and elementary, and on Tuesday it'll be middle school. I think Jess is doing that one, and then senior high on Wednesday, and then college on Thursday, all for students, and then on Friday I'll have a brief prayer for teachers and school administrators and parents. So each day, you don't have to watch the video. It's fine if you do. We'd love to have you watch those, but more importantly, be praying for our schools and for the children and teachers and everyone's safety, and for parents' peace of mind. This is a tough thing to decide how to do this with our own children. Some of you have chimed in and suggested the topic for our next Bible study, as I had asked you to do, and the most popular suggestion was Romans. It's just a bunch of people, after Romans was suggested, a bunch of people have jumped on and said, yeah, let's do Romans. So it's okay if everybody will do Romans. And just to kind of set the schedule tonight, we're doing chapter 15 of Mark. Next week we'll do chapter 16 of Mark, and that finishes it up. As I said earlier, it's the shorter of the Gospels. And then the very next week we'll begin with Romans, and I'll do a brief introduction, and we'll do chapter 1 probably, and get right into it. I'll have to look at that and see if are going to do a chapter a week, or some chapters. I know some weeks we'll do maybe 2 chapters, but that's a beautiful study, a very theological letter, and one that I hope you'll enjoy. So let's get into our study for tonight. Last week we covered the last half of Mark 14. It was a longer chapter, and so we took 2 weeks on that. At the end of that chapter, Jesus warned the apostles that they would all fall away. One of the apostles, tell me which one it was. Which one of the apostles was the most outspoken and and said, there is no way we would ever do that. In fact, if everybody else falls away, I won't. I'll be with you and be faithful to you. Tell me who that was, if you can. Yeah, thank you, Carol. It was Peter. Um, Peter had said, even if all fall away, I'll be faithful to you. All of them said they would, but Jesus had told the apostles that had told Peter that before the rooster crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times, and he absolutely did. We read of Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives, and then praying that God. It's like the human part of Jesus is really resisting at this point, but in the end he prays that my Father's will be done, and submits himself, of course, to the cross. As soon as Jesus had ended his time of prayer in the garden, what happened with Judas Iscariot? Now remember, at the Last Supper, Jesus had basically dismissed Judas to leave the supper and to go do, quote, whatever it was that he was supposed to do, and Judas had left. Now, after the prayer in the garden, Judas comes and does his thing. What is that? What does Judas do? If you would chime in and tell me what happened at the Mount of Olives in the garden with Judas. Okay, Jimmy just said that Judas kissed Jesus. That's exactly right. That was his way of identifying Jesus to these guards, people from the temple. Thank you, Eddie. He kissed Jesus, and whenever he did that, yes, he showed up with people to arrest Jesus. He was bringing them up to the Mount of Olives, and then he knew where Jesus would be. He had a prearranged sign that he would kiss Jesus, and that would identify him. He's there with the other 11 apostles. And there's more than likely a crowd all around. Nikki says he betrays him with that kiss. That's exactly right. That was the way he was able to. That's literally how he betrayed him, was by stepping in, kissing Jesus, and with that points out who he is. And so they arrested Jesus, took him back to the home of the high priest, where members of the Sanhedrin had gathered. We talked about how their assembly was actually illegal. They weren't supposed to meet at night, but they're in a rush. They want to get him convicted. So Becky, if you would read verses 1 through 5, Mark 15, verses 1 through 5. You have Bibles with you open. Follow along with her. She's going to be reading from the NIV, and it's interesting. I happened tonight to open up one of my older NIVs, so if you've got the one after 2011 that we usually use, you may see a few differences in this. Haven't noticed.
Very early in the morning, the chief priest with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed.
Thank you. Now here's the situation. The Jewish elders, the Sanhedrin, had found Jesus guilty of claiming to be God. To them, this is blasphemy. They can't imagine anyone on earth. Actually, it's so ironic because they were looking for a Messiah, they were looking for the Christ, and yet they see Jesus of Nazareth as a heretic, as someone who's blaspheming when he acknowledges that he is the Messiah, the Christ. But the Romans had, and by the way, the punishment for blasphemy to the Jews was stoning, killing by execution by stoning, but the Romans had taken away their right to execute. Capital offenses had to be punished by the Romans themselves. And so now verse 1 says that very early in the morning, the Sanhedrin, quote, made their plans. So let me ask you, what was their plan? You picture this. They've met during the night. They weren't supposed to. They found him guilty. They weren't supposed to find a person innocent or guilty in the same day that they tried him. They've broken that rule. They found him guilty. They've said he's guilty of blasphemy, which means he has to be put to death. But what is their plan? Okay, they've got him guilty, but they get up very early in the morning and prepare this plan. Okay, Nancy's got it right. They've got to get the Romans to kill Jesus. We've got to take him to the Romans. And this stuff about blasphemy, probably not going to play too well with the Romans. The Romans don't care that much about blasphemy. The Romans are, they've got to charge him, the Jewish leaders have to charge him before the Roman governor with something that is a capital offense in the Roman system. So to get Jesus before Pontius Pilate with charges that will stick or that the Romans will listen to, that is their plan. So Becky, if you would pick up at 6, and this is a bunch, but read 6 through 15. And listen, if you would, I'm going to ask you at the end of this, what was Pilate's view of the charges being made and of Jesus? What's Pilate's view of Jesus? Becky, if you would read that.
Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked him. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Okay. Now I ask you to be thinking about what's Pilate's view of the charges and Pilate's view of Jesus. And Nancy has chimed in here saying, well, first, Pilate finds no fault in Jesus. He's puzzled. Here they've brought this person before him, all upset, angry, pushing that he be crucified, and Pilate is curious. It's like he listens to all this, and then he turns to Jesus and asks Jesus. He really could see nothing that, as Nancy says, there's no fault. There's nothing that he can see that would be punishable by execution. He was amazed. Something else. Jimmy says he does not want to see Jesus killed. You can tell that by the way he offers up, okay, I've got this tradition. Always at Passover, I reach into the prison, I take out someone I let the crowd tell me who it is. It's kind of like giving a pardon that the Israelites on this one day of the year get to decide who gets the pardon. And so, yes, Greg says the charges are unfounded, and so he has him flogged and moves ahead. But he's puzzled, he's curious, he's somewhat amazed, and he asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, that one charge, king of the Jews, was the one that stuck in the Romans' ears, because if someone else claims to be king, you see, the Romans would appoint the king. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, each of those kings who came along were really puppet kings. And so the Romans stayed in charge. The Roman governor was in charge, but it helped him to govern the people and keep the peace if they had someone they viewed as one of their own. The Herods really weren't Jewish, but they identified more with the Jewish people, of course, than the Romans did. And so this one charge, are you the king of the Jews? If someone steps forward and says, well, I'm really the king, that would make the Romans nervous. In fact, if the person declared themselves the king, that would be insurrection. The Romans will execute you for that. Jesus stays in control. He stays very calm. And Pilate, as Jimmy says, didn't want to have him executed, and so he says, okay, we got this tradition, releasing a prisoner. How about it? Would you like me to release to you your king? And the people shout that they instead want Barabbas. Now, Barabbas is guilty of what Jesus is innocent of. Jesus hasn't started an insurrection. Barabbas had. And it's ironic that he receives his freedom and the crowd shouts, crucify. Mark gives us, I always kind of say it's a little bit like the Cliff Notes version. He gives us a summary of the events. One of the Gospels tells us that Pilate's wife came out and told him, I've had a dream about this man. You should have nothing to do with his death. One of the Gospels says that Pilate, when he hands Jesus over, washes his hands. And it was a ceremonial way, a symbolic way of saying, I have nothing to do with this death. Pilate he's in a quandary. He does not want to execute Jesus. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this, but down deep, this would never happen today. But he's a politician. He's a long way from Rome, and even though he's got a lot of soldiers, Pilate wants to be viewed as a good governor. He already had a charge brought against him before Caesar by some of the Jewish people. He doesn't want that to happen again. And so as a politician, as someone who wants the people to like him, he hands Jesus over, as Greg says, to be flogged and then to be crucified. You know, we read about archaeology and history. We like it whenever we read something like Josephus, and Josephus, the historian, will say something about the human Jesus or something that kind of verifies what happened in the Bible. We shouldn't be doing that for proof, but there's something interesting about Pontius Pilate. For years, people would say there's no real historical record that there was a Roman governor of Palestine named Pontius Pilate. The Romans, eventually Pontius Pilate was actually pulled back from Palestine and fired. He wasn't a very good governor. But there was no proof that he had been there. And people say, well, the Bible says that he was, but that's it. Well, interestingly enough, I don't remember how many years ago it was. I'm guessing 30 or 40 years ago, a stone, a marble pillar was unearthed somewhere in Israel. I don't remember exactly where the site was. And on it was carved the Latin name Pontius Pilate, and the stone dated back to the time of Jesus' life, in the time of Pontius Pilate. So it was just archaeology sometimes helps to show that, well, yeah, what's in the Bible is true. Maybe the historians didn't write much about Pontius Pilate, but he lived and he was the governor. And so now he's turned Jesus over. Becky's going to read about what happens to Jesus next, verses 16 through 20, Becky.
The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set him on it. And set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
Okay, I can remember as a child in my little Sunday school pamphlets having the images of the mocking and the flogging and those things. And I can remember how ill I felt of the Roman soldiers. It's like, these guys are so mean and so bad. They were being mean, there's no doubt about it, but they're probably the least to blame of all the people. They're following orders. Um, they had some time on their hands. Jesus was taken to the praetorium, their barracks. Uh, Remember, there's tension in the crowd. There's all these people, maybe as many as 3 million people have flocked into this city of Jerusalem. And the soldiers are really nervous that something's going to happen. Now one has been brought in that's been accused of insurrection, of rising up to be king. And so they're making fun of him. It may have simply been a release of tension. These guys are stressed. We don't know. I don't want to make excuses for them because what they do is cruel. What are some of the things they do as they make fun of Jesus? What are some of the things that they do in this cruel sport there with Jesus? Tell me, go ahead and make some comments letting me know what are things they did. Greg's already told us that he was flogged, and that was the last thing they did before they took him out. Flogging was beating someone with whips that had bone or sometimes stone embedded. Yes, Gayla says they spit on him. Nancy's got that one too. They spit on him, showing disgust. That would be so gross and so demeaning to have these guys doing that. They made a crown of thorns. They put the crown on him. They put that crown on his head, and you can just imagine jamming it down and blood running down his eyebrows as they did that. This crown of thorns being a joke about, okay, and they struck him. They had an old purple robe that they brought out and put on him. They gave him a staff, which was a king's staff. Then they took that away from him and beat him over the head. If you go to Israel, into Jerusalem, you'll see a place that's thought to be the site of the praetorium where the soldiers' barracks were, and carved in some of the pavement stones was a game. It's almost like it's got some rectangles and some squares, and soldiers would throw dice, and then they would move figures around this board that they had carved in the stone. Yeah, Tom Sutherland says they knelt before him. That's paying homage, pretending to worship or to pay honor to a king. And this game was called Making a King. And so it's almost as if Jesus was playing into this game that they cried out. Yes, they cried out, "Hail, King of the Jews." They are making fun, laughing. You can imagine one does something, everybody laughs. Somebody else does something worse, everybody laughs. And so they're just having cruel sport with Jesus. They flog him, and then they take him out, putting his own clothes back on him. They take him back out to crucify him. Now, this flogging was horrible. A lot of people would become unconscious during the flogging. Flogging was oftentimes a punishment in and of itself. You were sentenced to be flogged. Jesus was sentenced to be flogged and then executed. A horrible, horrible way to die. So, the Romans' practice was, if someone was a citizen and they did a capital offense, then they would be executed by beheading. But if you are not a citizen, you're executed by crucifixion. Crucifixion was something the Romans had learned from the Persians. Whenever they went in and defeated the Persian Empire, they saw that the Persians killed their prisoners by crucifixion. And so the Romans picked up on that, not only as a way to do capital punishment, but as a cruel deterrent to keep people, anyone else, from wanting to do that particular crime. The way that it worked, 4 soldiers would be assigned to a detachment. In this case, Jesus had a centurion leading the detachment. One soldier would walk in front. It's kind of a diamond-shaped procession with the prisoner in the center. The Roman soldier out front carried a sign, and on that sign it said whatever they had, treason, insurrection, whatever crime they had committed. And the reason for that was they're going to go in a long procession through the city, and they want people to see this is what this person did. If you do this, what's on the sign, this is what will happen to you. Jesus' sign said, King of the Jews. There was a soldier on either side of the convicted person, and they had spears and swords. Their role was to keep the person from slipping to the side and trying to escape. And then, of course, one more from behind, pushing and making sure that they made their way to the site of the crucifixion. Becky, if you would, read starting at verse 21, read through 30.
A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, King of the Jews. They crucified two robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself.
Okay, Simon was drafted to carry the cross. Why was it necessary for someone else, like Simon of Cyrene, to carry Jesus' cross? Mark doesn't really tell us, but we've read the other Gospels. Why was it necessary for Simon to have to carry that cross? And by the way, a Roman soldier could draft a Palestinian citizen by simply tapping you on the shoulder with their spear. Yes, someone's already said Jesus was too weak. Tap someone on the shoulder with your spear and say the emperor needs you to, Caesar needs you to do this, and you had to do it. And his flogging has made him very weak. He's lost a lot of blood. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people would pass out during a flogging. Occasionally someone even would die, especially from the loss of blood. It wasn't meant to be capital punishment, but it was brutal. The flesh was torn, a ton of bleeding. Jesus would have been so weak, there's no way he could have carried a cross. More than likely was approaching shock with what he had been through. Jewish widows regularly went to Golgotha, to the place of execution, and there they would have this mixture of wine with myrrh. Myrrh was a drug. The idea was to dull the pain a bit. It was offered to Jesus, and he refused it. Now that's an act of kindness that was offered. Why did he refuse that? Or what does it show us that Jesus didn't take the wine and the myrrh that was offered to him? I think it shows us something important about Jesus' attitude in approaching the cross. Okay, he knows what he has to do, and he's going to do that. He's going to face it without any relief, without any, yeah, exactly, Eddie. He's suffering for us all, and he's not going to mitigate that suffering by drinking wine or taking the myrrh that's mixed in with it that might dull that. Now, Jesus has come, and verse 24 says, and they crucified him. All the Gospels tend to say it in so few words. It's almost like we want to say it and we want to move on. Yeah, you all are exactly right. It's his to suffer. Didn't want to mitigate it with a drug. It's almost no doubt that the vertical part of the cross was embedded deeply in the soil or the rock, and it didn't move. It stayed there. The cross beam, the horizontal part of the cross, is what the prisoner had to carry. And if you think about it, it would have been large, almost like a railroad tie, very, very heavy for someone to carry. It would have been impossible for a person to have carried the cross uh, with the vertical and the horizontal. But whenever they got, here's what it, whenever they say, and they crucified him, here's what happened. When they got to the place where he was to be crucified, they would have thrown him down on his back on top of that crossbeam. They would have reached out his arms, one on each side, holding his arms outstretched. One would have taken a large nail or a spike and driven it, actually not through his hand, but through his wrist. The hand would have pulled out. The flesh can't hold body weight, but between the two arm bones, that would have done it. You can imagine the horrific pain as that spike was nailed into his wrist. And then with two soldiers on each side would pick up that cross beam, lift it up, and drop it into a bracket on the vertical part of the cross. Now he's on the cross, feet hanging down. They would have bent his legs up a bit, and sometimes they nailed a nail through each ankle on the side of the vertical part, but oftentimes they lapped the feet and then used one spike driven through the ankles into the wooden upright. A few years ago, I believe it was in the early 60s, archaeologists found two ankle bones in a dig in Palestine, two ankle bones stuck together with the remnant of a rusted spike. Now that wasn't Jesus's, nobody claimed that it was, but it was just evidence of how the Romans did their crucifixion. If you look and see what time of day it was the third hour, some translations say. The NIV says 9 o'clock. 6 o'clock was the first hour of the day, and so it would have been dark, still dusky dark, when they took him to the Romans. Now here at 9 o'clock, that early in the morning, he's on the cross. For 3 hours he hung there, and it probably looked like any other crucifixion. People were walking by yelling insults at him, come down and save yourself. But then something dramatic happens, verses 33 through 37. Becky, if you would read those.
31.
33 through 37.
Yeah. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing near heard this, they said, Listen, he's calling Elijah. One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said.
Okay. At noon, the 6th hour, now suddenly everything turns dark. Things have become really, really scary. If you think about it, noon is the time of day when the sun is at its peak. It's the brightest part of the day. Suddenly it's dark. It would be like a total eclipse of the sun. Everyone immediately saw that something very dramatic has happened. Another gospel tells us that the centurion responsible for the execution said, surely this was the Son of God. Fear gripped everyone, it says, and Mark tells us that something else finally happened at 3 p.m. What happened at 3 p.m.? And your Bible, your translation may say at the 9th hour. Becky gave you some Aramaic words, lama sabachthani, that he cried out. And then what happened? And by the way, you tell me if you would what that Aramaic means. You don't have to speak Hebrew to get that. It gets translated in our Bibles. What was? Okay, Jimmy says he died. Before he died, he cried out in that Hebrew, my God, why have you forsaken me? I have a feeling that at that moment when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He was taking on our sin, right? Yes, thank you. Pat, my God, why have you forsaken me? Uttered, then he dies. Yes. Whenever he says that, he's feeling separation from his heavenly Father. The thing that separates us most often from God is our sin. We're like children. Whenever a child gets in trouble, they want to hide from their parents. Whenever we sin, we feel a separation from God. And I think for the first time, the son had never committed sin. He doesn't know what that feels like, to feel that separation. And now he feels that separation because he's taken on our sin and he feels separated from God. Becky is going to read some verses out of Psalm 22 because I think God pointed Jesus in this moment toward the psalm written way before Jesus' crucifixion. But listen how these words resonate with what happens on the cross. And I think Jesus knows that. And he's saying things that are recorded in Psalm 22, written really for him that time. First, she's going to read verse 1, then 7 through 8, and then 14 through 18. This is Psalm 22.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from the words of my groaning? All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men have encircled me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. Posterity will serve him. For future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it.
Okay, when that psalm was written, David was feeling anguish and pain and describing his situation. Probably had no idea that he was going to be describing the situation of his descendant in the earthly sense, Jesus the Christ, actually dying on the cross. But Jesus was directed back to those words and utters the word that reminds us of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? The people surrounding him had no idea what was going on. They thought he was calling for Elijah. The Aramaic word sounded a little bit like Elijah, and so they're waiting to see if Elijah appears. And then Mark tells us that with a, quote, loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The Gospel of John tells us that Jesus' loud cry was him shouting out, it is finished. He's done. He has completed this thing that he came to earth to do. Now some more things happen. Becky, 38 through 41, if you would, back in Mark 15.
The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and the younger and of Joseph and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there.
Okay. Why did the temple, what does it symbolize for the veil or curtain in the temple to have been torn top to bottom? What does that tell us or show us? Um, all of the Gospels tell us about that veil being torn. So it's really, really important that we know about that happening. And by the way, that veil was the one that separated the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, from the rest of the temple. Yeah, Eddie has answered saying that veil separated people from God. So uh, when priests went into the Holy of Holies, or the court next to that, that curtain kept them from seeing God. It's torn top to bottom, and it's saying God is available to all of us. We're no longer separated. That says to us, it's wonderful to have someone praying for us, and I'm always happy to pray for people, but we don't need a priest to pray for us. We can speak directly to God. Thank you. Shelda Truelove just said that. We can speak very directly to God ourselves. God hears us, and God responds to us. We don't have to be priests or have any particular certification or qualification. We all have access to God. I had mentioned the centurion and thought it was in another gospel. It's in Mark as well, declaring this must have been the Son of God. Becky read about the many women who had followed from Galilee down now to Judea and to Jerusalem, who have been part of his ministry. They've been taking care of his needs and are there at the cross whenever he dies. Becky, one more reading, if you would, 15:42 through 47.
It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were there and saw it laid.
That ending that says, okay, they saw the stone laid, that leads into next week's scripture, because we're going to see Easter next week. I hate to end in a study. I always say this when I'm doing a study. I hate to end with the crucifixion and the burial, because I want to move on to the resurrection and to Easter. But we have to really fully understand and grasp the crucifixion for us to appreciate the resurrection. Mark had a way all through Jesus' last week of telling us which day of the week we're on. He did that Sunday, did it Monday, did it Tuesday. Then we jumped ahead 2 days to Thursday. Now he tells us that it's Friday. It's the day of preparation, meaning they have to get ready on Friday for the Sabbath, which begins at sundown on Friday. Which means, all this means is they're in a hurry. Jesus died at 3. Joseph of Arimathea, who, by the way, it's ironic, he's a member of the Sanhedrin. But there's something about this Jesus that Joseph, it doesn't tell us about him speaking up at the trial. We don't know if he was there. But he obviously believed. And so he has gone to Pilate and asked for the body. Pilate was surprised. People typically were on the cross for days. You died by asphyxiation. You pushed up to breathe, you let yourself down, you pushed up to breathe, and that horrible cycle went on for hours or days on end. Other Gospels tell us that they wanted the bodies or the prisoners off the cross by the end of the day on Friday, because it was a special Sabbath, and they broke the legs of the criminals so they could no longer push themselves up to breathe. They came to Jesus and saw that he already had died, and they were surprised by that, stuck a spear in his side in order to see and and realized that he really was dead. That at least, that the time on the cross was brief. At least that was merciful. Um, and so Mark used some precious papyrus here. It's not like grabbing another sheet of paper. Papyrus was expensive, and he used part of his papyrus and the expensive ink that he was using to tell us that Pilate sent for a centurion to confirm that Jesus really was dead. Because some who had heard about Jesus rising from the dead later were saying, well, he was never dead. They took him down from the cross. He was still alive. He escaped. And Mark wants us to know, no, he was dead. Even the Romans went and checked to make sure that he was dead. Don't take it from us, he's saying, his followers. The Romans checked to make sure. Joseph of Arimathea rushed to the market, got a linen cloth. That would have wrapped the body head to toe, up and down, and then he would have been wrapped around. You're almost like wrapped like a mummy. And in doing that, they covered the body with spices. Joseph didn't have time to do a proper burial with that. He put a few spices on, carved out the tomb, and placed the body there. Joseph is doing the best that he can. I wonder if Joseph may have thought, well, it didn't take too many spices, because he could still smell that ointment that was placed on Jesus' head back on Tuesday night by the woman as she anointed Jesus with the perfume, the oil. We said then, Jesus said then, that she was preparing him for burial. But Joseph let it be known that he hadn't done as good a job preparing the body for burial as he would like to have. And that's going to prompt the women to come, not on Saturday, not on the Sabbath. They can't do anything on the Sabbath. But on Sunday morning, they're going to come to prepare the body. And that's going to be a beautiful time. Next week, we'll read chapter 16 about their discovery of the empty tomb. It's been great having you all tonight. Next week, we will do chapter 16, and we'll finish up Mark then. Bless you all. Have a good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. Good night.